Ladies and gentlemen, this being our annual wine lunch, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Andrew Hardy. Now, you've all no doubt read the bulletin, but just a couple of highlights of Andrew's career. He is notably a fifth-generation Hardy, being the great-great-grandson of Thomas Hardy, who is widely acknowledged as, if not the founder, then certainly one of the founders of the Australian wine industry. Andrew graduated from what is now the Charles Sturt University and began his winemaking career in 1982 with Petaluma, working there with Brian Croser. He moved on later to work with Knappstein and won several awards there, including Best Cabernet in the world. He has since worked in Oregon, Bordeaux, California. In other words, he's very widely experienced and travelled. Andrew's also taken several important positions of leadership in the industry and at one stage was chairman of the Royal Adelaide Wine Show. In October of this year, Andrew joined WD Wines to complete the team at Parker Coonawarra Estate, which is, of course, who he's representing today, along with the other labels in the WD Wines portfolio. Just before I ask Andrew to come up, can I just say that there are on your table a number of wine order forms. So please use those as much as you like, and we have some more spares here if needed. Andrew has very generously donated a magnum of red wine, which will go in 2 weeks' time. So I'll go back half a step. If you could please give your order forms to Trevor, our secretary, and it doesn't have to be today, it has to be before the close of the meeting in 2 weeks' time. And the largest order received by the close of that meeting in 2 weeks' time will receive the magnum. So go for it. In the meantime, it's my pleasure now to ask Andrew to address us.
Thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here. The Magnum of Red is a ripper Magnum of Red, and I think if we run out of wine today, we might have to drink it early, Chris, and then I'll dig another one out from. Yeah, I know, on this table, of course. Yeah. Thank you for welcoming me here. It's lovely to be at Adelaide Oval. I think it's going to be a much better day today than it's going to be next Thursday, when Australia gets sent into bat and's bowled out in the second session, and we watch the Indians bat. So. It's going to be kind of a depressing series, I think, the way things are going. And does anybody know who's going to actually be batting for Australia? That's the big question at the moment. The wine industry's been a very kind place to grow up. As Chris said, I'm a fifth-generation Hardy winemaker. Dad discouraged me from going into the wine industry. I think the wine industry back then was back in the late 70s, was a pretty tricky sort of a place to be living in. It was still plagued by, people just weren't drinking enough wine, and we then had a lovely wine boom in the 80s, which was kind of started by Jacobs Creek when that got very popular overseas, and we had a group of MWs that came through Australia in 85, Masters of Wine from all around the world, but predominantly England, and that really kick-started the love affair of Australian wine overseas. There was one sold over there, but that really got things motoring. So. The industry went from being family controlled when my forebears were doing it, and the Hillsmiths at Yalumba and the Penfolds at Penfolds, and it's a big family, big old families were running the industry. As some of you will know now, it's pretty corporate. There's a lot of the corporates have come in for the second time, so it's quite interesting for me to get out of. I was 1 month short of 36 years at Petaluma, and I went through I counted them the other day, 7 different owners in those 36 years, so including Lion Nathan, who are probably the most stable of all the owners. But so it's been an interesting industry. Being a hardy and being in the industry is kind of natural. I went jackarooing when I first left school, before I went to uni, and thought I wanted to be a farmer, and then woke up one morning and decided that really winemaking was where I wanted to be. So that was kind of good. And then started at Petaluma, as Chris said, and lasted nearly 36 years. WD wines. Some might know Robert Hesketh, who's the father of John Hesketh, who's the major shareholder. Robert's a funny bloke, and I said to him one day, "What's WD stand for?" And it stands for World Domination. So he wanted a wine company that would dominate the world. Anyway, we haven't quite done that, but we're getting there. So it's a bit of a mix mash of brands, but we've got a winery at Coonawarra Parker Estate. We've got a winery in the Barossa, St John's Road. Vickery is a Clare Riesling and an Eden Valley Riesling, and then my new label, which is not here yet, is called Ox Hardy. My nickname's Ox. So Ox Hardy's a McLaren Vale Shiraz that we'll make from our family vineyard, which my great-great-grandfather bought in 1871. It's been in our family ever since. So it's kind of 5 separate brands, all lovely wines. It's really nice to be now part of a very small winemaking team, and I think I know we've sort of got a bit of mix-up on the table with what's being served, but the first one was Vickery Riesling 2017 from Eden Valley, and then the first red was supposed to be St John's Road Grenache. Riesling is one of those wonderful varieties that I'm sure a lot of you drink a whole lot of. I hope a lot of you drink a whole lot of, and it's and 17 is recognised from most of us in the industry as probably the best vintage in living memory. As I say, I started at Petaluma in 82, and the 80 and the 82 wines were spectacular. But 2017 really stands up there with all the great vintages like 02, as well as 02. That's a beautiful one. They will last 30, 40, 50 years easily, especially under the screwcap. We've managed in Australia to get rid of nearly all the corks. There's still a few diehards that are sticking to it, in my opinion, stupidly. But anyway, that's a matter of opinion. But screwcap those wines will age incredibly gracefully. The Grenache is another old variety that. My father was a winemaker as well, and he hated Grenache. He called it Grenache, and I think it was one of those sort of hangovers from the days when most of the Grenache was made into tawny port. It was often grown by growers, whether it was Barossa, McLaren Vale, or they're the main 2 regions, Barossa and McLaren Vale, and they'd crop the living hell out of it. So they had huge crops of fairly ordinary fruit, and so it got a reputation of making pretty thin, gutless red wine. And unless you fortified it and then stuck it in barrel for 30 years and let it concentrate and made some of those great fortified, some of those great tawny ports that hopefully some of you have tasted over the years. So Grenache has been massively unpopular for the last 25 years probably as the red wine boom took off. Pinot Noir was the red wine that's really sort of taken everybody by storm. Grenache has just started. It's probably 3 years into a really spectacular revival. And people aren't hung up on the colour anymore. Most people used to say, if a red wine looks the colour of a Pinot, it's not really red wine. We all wanted bull's blood. We wanted great, big, rich, dark, black red wines. Pinot Noir really started that trend of saying, actually, you don't have to worry about the colour so much. Forget the colour. Think about the nose and think about the palate. Think about what flavour you're getting in your mouth. Forget about the colour. That took off, and Grenache is just starting to. You probably all know that Turkey Flat won the Jimmy Watson a couple of years ago, the coveted prize in Melbourne, and that's a really light, delicate red, a bit like the Resilient from St John's Road, very aromatic, still pretty alcoholic. If you drink a bottle, you'll still fall over, but which is kind of maybe 2 for some people, but I think they're a lovely, soft, easy drinking, but still with some power, and I think they're wines that will also age gracefully. I think the new wave Grenache is really spectacular, and you've got the 2 main protagonists, McLaren Vale and Barossa, and they're sort of settling into 2 styles. There's this lighter aromatic style like the one we've got today, the Resilient, and the Turkey Flat, and then there's some bigger, bolder sort of reds, mainly from McLaren Vale and mainly from the northern end of McLaren Vale, which is the Blewett Spring sands, which are seem to be peculiarly suited to it. It still makes beautiful port, but most of us now are using it for dry red, which is what most people drink. Let's face it. So I think you'll see when you taste that hopefully you'll enjoy it and see what the story with Grenache is. So Dad was wrong. Grenache does make good red. It's just got to be made the right way. And a lot of the vineyards that we used early on in the red wine Grenache were really good Tawny Port blocks, not really good red wine blocks, and I think that, you know, it goes for everything. You think about wines like St Helier Old Block Shiraz. When that was first started, that was just any old vineyard that St Helier could find. They very quickly narrowed it down to saying it needs to be vineyards that are really suited to red wine making. It's not just anything. So I think Grenache is the same sort of experience we're going on, the journey we're going on to find the right vineyards, which is exciting, which is a really great thing about winemaking. The last two wines we got, hopefully, depending which order you drank them, Parker Estate Coonawarra Chardonnay. Chardonnay's not sort of, it was massively popular in Coonawarra 25 years ago. There's not many of us left doing it down there. It's still got a nice little niche. It probably doesn't have the complexity that we might see in Adelaide Hills or Mornington or Yarra, but in a good year, Coonawarra Chardonnay is really a lovely wine. That's quite complex. It's partial malolactic. It's barrel fermented. I think it's a good style, you know, without probably reaching the heights of those really, really great regions for Chardonnay in Australia. And that again is one of those experiments. The oldest Chardonnays, commercial Chardonnays, were planted in 1971. So when you think about where we are as an industry, Burgundy's been making Chardonnay for 300 or 400 years, and arguably back to Roman times, we've been making Chardonnay for a couple of hundred max. So, you know, and really only 40 or 50 years seriously. So most of what we're doing in Australia, and people say, what's going to be the next big thing? And really, to me, with winemaking in Australia, it's not what the next big thing is, it's the evolution of what we're doing in styles and where we're going with regions. You know, you think the 65 wine regions, recognised wine regions in Australia, and nearly all of them have got Chardonnay, and nearly all of them have got Shiraz. And it doesn't really make any sense, does it, when you think about what varieties suit what region best. We're narrowing down. So that evolution of style and where we're growing these wines is going to get ever more intense. But I bring Coonawarra Chardonnay is lovely. I think that's a delicate, you know, people were drinking masses of Chardonnay, and then we all got carried away as winemakers in the early 80s and had these fantastic barrel budgets that you couldn't step over. And we all started buying tons and tons of new oak. It was a wonderful time. And the cooperages started taking us all overseas and taking us on these wonderful junkets into all the forests in Europe. We've all gone back from that now. We're much more subtle and gentle with the way we use oak. So for those of you that say we don't drink Chardonnay because it's too oaky, you've got to go and drink the good Chardonnays from the colder regions like Coonawarra, Adelaide Hills, Yarra, Mornington, Tassie, because they're really spectacular wines now. And they are being recognised around the world as world-class Chardonnays. You know, they just stand up there as with the best from anything in the world. So it's worth exploring if you've been an ABC person, anything but Chardonnay person. It's worth having a crack at them again. You just got to pay a bit more than $20. That's retail. That's the only issue. Hey? Yeah, 16. But yeah, that's right. 16 on the special price today. It's a steal. It's a lovely one. Yeah, order up because they're really good prices. I just know. I saw the list a minute ago. The second red is a bit of an interesting story. So Phil Lehman is Peter Lehman's youngest son, and up until a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, he was the chief winemaker for this little group. He's sort of backed out to do his own thing mainly, but he's still a shareholder. His father, Peter Lehman, and Robert Hesketh were great mates. They did a lot of judging together. So this is a Coonawarra Cabernet Barossa Shiraz 2015. It's simply called O2 because it's the second blend. So it's kind of a family collaboration between two old wine families. Robert, well, you all know Peter Lehman. He was Saltram's and then set up Peter Lehman. And Robert Hesketh was chair of judges at Adelaide Wine Show for many, many years, and one of the most prolific wine show judges in Australia. When wine show judging really looked at faults, like I remember talking to him the other day about Adelaide Wine Show in the late 60s, and if there were 1,000 wines in the show, 300 would have been absolutely faulty and just chucked out, like real proper rubbish. Badly made, bad varieties, all sorts of faults in the bottle, and people were putting them in a bottle, and consumers were buying them and drinking this complete junk. So what the wine show system did in the late 60s into the 70s was sort all that out. So now you go to Adelaide Wine Show, for instance, this year was 2,788 wines, I think. Melbourne's about the same. There's not one wine that's faulty. You know, the only faults you find are the dreaded corks. So and we have a policy now in the industry, in shows, if it's corked, it's chucked out, there's no second chance. Because if you're a consumer and you go and buy a bottle or 2 bottles at the bottle shop and one's corked, you don't get your money back unless you're smart enough to take it back to the shop and say it's corked. So in the wine show system, cork's the only thing we really ever see anymore. But think back to that. If there were 2,700 wines and a third of them were faulty, it's been a huge change, and I guess it's another indication of the giant steps that the wine show system made. And in Australia, it's a really rigorous wine show system. It's really, really, really tough. And Robert Hesketh was one of the true founders of that system with Len Evans. So this is a collaboration we do every year of varying proportions of Cabernet, Coonawarra Cabernet, Barossa Shiraz. If it wasn't good enough in any given year, we wouldn't do it. And we might have to call it now Lehman and Hesketh Hardy. I don't know how that's going to work. It's going to be an interesting conundrum when we come to talk about that. But I think a lovely example of what is a great old blend. I had the pleasure of judging Matthew Duke's Tyson Stelt's Great Australian Red Challenge again this year, or chaired it actually, and that's a tasting only for Cabernet Shiraz Cabernet blends. It can be any proportion, but it's got to be just those 2 varieties, predominantly those 2 varieties. And there was 125 wines, I think, and they were all just about like any one of them you'd buy and take away. So Cab Shiraz, Shiraz Cab in Australia, it's uniquely Australian. Nobody else in the world does it. We don't buy enough of it in Australia. It is truly the old winemakers used to do it all the time. And when Dad started at Hardy's in '52, back then the winemakers would travel and they'd go up to Stanthorpe in Queensland and they'd buy a bit of wine up there, literally buy wine out of barrel, put it on a truck, send it down. They'd go down to the Hunter, buy a whole lot of wine in the Hunter. They'd go down to Rutherglen, buy a whole lot of Rutherglen. They'd go to Mudgee and buy some mud, because that was always called Mudgee mud. And it'd all come back into South Australia and be blended in those days for Hardy's at Mile End. But it was the predominant thing was always Cab Shiraz or Shiraz Cab, and it stood the test of time. I think there's a lot of people refocusing on it. Yolumbra have just done a wine called the Kaylee, which is $350 a bottle, I think, unashamedly. It's got fantastic packaging, and it's Coonawarra Cab Barossa Shiraz. So, a lot of the companies are going back and saying, well, we've got to look back at our roots and say what really is uniquely Australian. You could argue that Clare and Eden Valley Riesling is uniquely Australian. Nobody really makes styles like that anywhere else in the world. If you go to Germany, they're sweet. They're Botrytis in New Zealand. So we've got a few unique things in Australia. Riesling, one of them. I think Semillon from the Hunter is another, and I think that Cab Shiraz Cab blend is something that they'd love to be able to do it in Bordeaux. They'd love to in the green years be able to blend a bit of Shiraz from the warmer parts of France into Bordeaux. They're not allowed to do it because of the appellation control. So there are a few lovely unique things, and I think Cab Shiraz is one of them. So I hope you're enjoying that. It's a complicated little company, WD, World Domination Wines. It's great fun. We sit around and make decisions quickly. There's 3 of us that make most of the decisions. We don't have to have PowerPoint presentations or go to a bank of accounts in Sydney, which is kind of really neat, having dealt with all that stuff for years and years and years. I'm sure there's lots of accountants in the room, but they have been the bane of the wine industry for a long time. We know we need them, but we know we put up with them more than need them, more than anything. They never quite understand inventory. I've always wondered how you think you can have how the accountants think we need to just destock. You need to build up stocks. You can't sell today what you made yesterday. So it's always been a conundrum. It's also been the accountants have also given us a hard time with oak. And oak's a very important part of winemaking, and it's a bit like eggs and bacon. Eggs don't taste half as good without bacon, and most wines don't taste half as good as without oak, obviously other than Riesling. And the accountants have always hammered us on how much new oak we need to use, and with some reason, I must admit, because the oak cooperages come to Australia and sell their French oak, and every year they come over and say, oh, we've got to put the price up. And you say, why are you putting the price up this year? Well, the Italian furniture manufacturers are coming into the industry and they're buying all the trees to make oak furniture. And we can only use this much of the tree and they can use the rest of the tree, and you go, yeah, righto. And instead of saying, don't take us all overseas on these jaunts, on these junkets, forget that, just give us a good price on the bloody barrels, because we still want to use them. So it's been interesting arguing with them. And one of the big things that's happening in that industry now, that I don't know whether you know, but the forests in France are controlled under Napoleonic law. So when Napoleon was in power, he said a couple of things, a couple of smart things. He said a couple of dumb things as well. But one was with the forests, they were protected under his law. So if they were going to have a war, they had to go round the forests. So they weren't allowed to smash the forest to pieces with warfare. And that's managed to hold through both the First and Second Wars, that most of the French forests, oak forests, have been spared. And at one stage in the early 80s, mid-80s actually, we started using some Russian oak, and we thought, I mean, the theory is the colder the climate, the slower the tree grows, the tighter the grain, the more suitable it's going to be for winemaking. So we always go for tight grain, so that trees are grown very slowly. And of course, Russia being Russia, it was freezing. We thought this is going to be great oak, and we did some trials early on, and we thought, yeah, this is really promising. And then the cooperages started buying a lot more of it. And the problem was that when Hitler went into Russia, he didn't care about the forest. He started smashing them, and what happened was the trees would be hit by shrapnel, hardened steel, of course, and that would form a knot. And so therefore a knot is no good for winemaking in a barrel. But also when the saws hit the hardened steel, the ordnance, it actually smashed the saws to pieces. So they were actually disintegrating these huge saws. So it's massively dangerous. So we very quickly realised that Russia was not probably the place to get oak from, which is kind of disappointing. The other great oak region is there's lots in Europe, obviously, but this is America, and there's a couple of varieties of oak that grow in America. And the American forests, of course, wonderful thing about America, everything's just willy-nilly. You just go for it. You chop down what you like. There's no real guard on who can chop. There's no Napoleonic law in America, obviously. But the bourbon industry over there is so enormous now that most of the oak that's grown in America is used for bourbon. And then, because if you're making an American bourbon, it has to go through new oak. It has to be new oak for 3 years, and then the barrels can go elsewhere. What's been happening recently is a lot of the barrels go to Scotland, because the Scottish don't have to use new oak. They can just use old bourbon barrels, which are fantastic. And then, in fact, there's a couple of companies that have got cooperages in Scotland, and they're importing barrels from all over the world at the moment, and shaving them and refiring them in Scotland for use of the oak, and they can use them for years and years and years, which is good. So it's quite a renewable resource, other than, of course, the Americans who chop down anything they feel like chopping down. So, but very important part of a wonderful part of what we do. I guess one of the lovely things about barrels is, when you're getting a bit stressed in the winery and the accountants are giving you too much of a hard time, you say, I've got to go and do a tasting. I've got to check on how everything's going in barrel. And you can disappear for 3 or 4 hours, and that's called work, which is kind of really neat, And you come out of it, if you do that at 9 o'clock in the morning, because generally the accountants get you early and when you're still fresh, and by midday and you've been tasting, even though we're spitting, of course, there's nothing better than going to the pub and having a steak at lunch when you've been tasting. You tasted 400 or 500 barrels in the morning. It's kind of neat. So that's one of winemaking is a great career. It's great fun. We are making stuff that we grow paddock to plate. So, we've got our own vineyards. We go right through to coming out and hopefully encouraging you guys to drink the wine and sell the wine. So it's one of those unique industries that we do see it all the way through, and we're judged by what's in those bottles, and also when you think about, we're putting blends together right now in 2018 of 26, or we've done most of the 2016s, but 2017s that we're going to be talking about maybe in 10, 20, 30 years' time. It's kind of a leap of faith to say, well, here it is, we're going to put it in bottle. And hope we don't get it wrong. And I think now with the way we've gone in Australia, we don't get that wrong that often. I mean, you might not like all the wines everybody makes, but they're sound, and they're all made with love, from the big guys to the little guys. It all starts with grapes, which is great. It's a great thing to start with. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the wines. It's kind of a quick journey around Australia and the world. If there's any questions, I think that's why Chris is standing next to me. There's a few questions. None about accountants, hopefully.
Andrew, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. Can I just ask you, after harvest and fermentation, what makes you decide on French oak or American oak or a combination of both?
It's pretty much, I guess we sort of know the vineyards we're taking the fruit from, and generally, for instance, traditionally, big Barossa Shiraz has tended to go into American oak. More delicate Coonawarra cabs or Cabernets tend to go into French. So it's basically what we decide, really. But we use probably less American oak than we were years ago. But if you drink Barossa Shiraz, a good portion of that, including Penfolds, will have been in American oak. So if you use it carefully, American oak tends to be a bit more vanilla, a bit more obvious. So you get bang for your buck. French oak's a bit more delicate. So it really, and I couldn't think of anybody that's using American oak on Chardonnay, for instance. It's all French, or European anyway. So it's kind of, you work out, that's part of the skill. That's, the skill. So the answer is skill.
David?
Yesterday, Donald Trump
Yeah.
said of a very important report on climate change
Use it.
that he didn't believe it. He didn't believe in climate change. Now, as a winemaker, can you say something about the impending catastrophe that climate change may bring on the wine industry?
Oh, I thought you meant the impending catastrophe that Trump's bringing on. Trump, that's a stupid thing to say. I mean, and I think there's two issues there. One is Al Gore came out and called it in The Inconvenient Truth, called it global warming. That's a misnomer. He shouldn't have said that, because if you look at records, the globe is not warming. The climate is changing. There's absolutely no doubt. If you think about the Industrial Revolution the Western world had, and now the Industrial Revolution that China and India are having with so many people, it's just completely stupid thinking that the climate isn't changing. Whether it's all man-made, that's a different debate completely. And we could be going through a cycle, which I think we probably are, and the world will get cold again. And so to call it global warming is wrong. Climate change is happening. We're seeing in regions where we're growing. In the wine industry in Australia, we talk about either going altitude or south. So we're either all going to Adelaide Hills, Orange, Tasmania, Mornington, Yarra, Margaret River. So you think about the coast of Australia, we're either going coastal because it's cooler, or we're going altitude like Orange. We're seeing ripening over a month early, 6 weeks earlier. We're also seeing but it's not just ripening, and that's where everybody's sort of got their knickers in a knot, that the whole season's changed. So the vines are waking up earlier, they're coming out of dormancy earlier because there's high level of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's what vines, like all plants, thrive on. So we're seeing a change in the whole phenology of the vine. So it's bursting earlier, it's not staying as dormant longer. The seasons are contracting, of course, because you think about the summer, well, we're not really having much of a summer now, but the summers are getting longer, the autumn's getting longer, the winter's getting shorter, and the spring's getting longer. So the whole thing's changing. And to think that it's not because we're dry, not because there's 7 billion or whatever the number is just crazy. So we see it, and you see it when you grow things, especially when you grow perennial crops. Every year, the same vineyard. 30 years ago, if you'd said to a grower in the Barossa, you'll be picking Shiraz in February, they would have called you I can't think of the German word for it, but they would have called you and now often the Barossa's finished by the end of February. And normally that would be, Coonawarra, I remember picking the 02 Cabernet in Coonawarra, we picked on the 5th of May. 2 years ago, 15, we'd picked it 1st of March. So that's we see it, we really see it. How long it's going to last for and whether that cycle is going to change. I mean, you think about the Federation drought, which was, I don't know officially, but 1895 to 1912, that's a pretty long drought that affected most of Australia. That could have been a cycle as well. Global records are accurate. But so we believe, we're very firm believers in climate change, and not so much Trump.
Thank you, Andrew. My question is to do with geographical locations and varieties. I mean, a country like Italy with 1,100 pure DNA varieties has shown that they don't play around. Each little small area, this is way smaller than South Australia. They play, they don't swap variety around areas. There is an area near Coonawarra called Rattonbully who had a big fight with Coonawarra to use Coonawarra name originally. That got rejected. And I'd like your opinion on that specific area in terms of the quality of their wines.
Rattonbully is a really good region. It should never have been Coonawarra, and there's vineyards in Coonawarra now that shouldn't have been in Coonawarra as well. It's climate, but it's also soil. And in Coonawarra's case, the original boundary was that famous cigar-shaped Terra Rossa, so the red loam over limestone. And the best bit of dirt down there is actually under the main road, and for a very good reason. The main road was the highest part of the country down through there. So when they were taking horse and cart down, they didn't get bogged if they stayed up there. If they went down there, they got bogged. So it's Coonawarra is very different from Rattenbury. Rattenbury is very good. It's basically, depending on who you believe, but it's a lot of the lighter red sand is blown up off the flats, up onto the limestone in the caves around Narracourt, and that's the main region. There's been some fantastic wines made there. There are being some fantastic wines made there. It sort of did a major expansion late 90s when the whole industry went mental on planting, completely mental, wrongly. There's a lot of people paying for it now, and a lot of the vineyards that were planted in Rattenbury have now been bought by Casella, which is Yellowtail. Some of you might have drunk it. Hopefully you haven't. I shouldn't say that. But Yellowtail is that massive brand in the US, and it's well-made wine. It's bulk wine. It's industrial wine, if you like. And John Casella's been buying vineyards all over Australia. It's great. It's getting rid of a lot of fruit. I think there's a couple of vineyards in Rattenbury that have made Grange. I think the last Grange has got a small percentage. I've dealt with it a bit over the years. It's really good. I don't think personally. I'd rather be in Coonawarra, but that's personal. I'd rather Cabernet in Coonawarra than Rattenbury. But
I think Parker's used Rattenbury fruit, doesn't it?
no, we don't use any Rattenbury. No. Holick do. There's a few down there that do.
Peter? No?
Yeah. Yeah.
The question I'd like to ask is about the French.
That's interesting. Right?
You joke a little bit about
I wish I
Napoleon and his don't go through the trees and that. But when you go to Burgundy and other parts of France, particularly in Burgundy, there's incredible restrictions on what they can do. And that's been there since, 1850?
Mm-hmm.
And they still create great wines. They have experimented a little bit with taking their wines, the grapes, higher, but that doesn't seem to have worked. Why are they still so good?
Centuries. It's particularly suited to Pinot and Chardonnay. It's what that wonderful word that we can't translate, terroir. It's what they've got. Chester Osmond, who's a good friend of mine, came out earlier this year and he was in London. He needed some publicity. Can you imagine Chester needing publicity? It's kind of an oxymoron, isn't it? But anyway, he said in 100 years they won't be making Pinot in Burgundy. And it got the desired effect. He was on every industry newspaper and publication and website and whatever for months. It's a bit like benchmarking, and we look at Burgundy. If we're making Pinot or Chardonnay in Australia, we look at Burgundy. If we're making Cabernet here, we look at Bordeaux. If we want to make Nebbiolo, we look at Alba, we look at Piedmont. So it's kind of like when you're going to go and build a new car, you don't look at a Commodore, you look at a Bentley or a BMW or whatever. It's benchmarking. And so the short answer is that's where those varieties came from. They have mucked around with a whole lot of stuff over the years. Arguably they make some of the greatest wines in the world. I mean, you read Halliday and he tastes DRC or drinks DRC. He doesn't taste it. He drinks DRC all the time. He can afford $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 a bottle. Most of the rest of us can't do that. So there's a lot of, when you go south, there's a lot of Burgundy that is not so great. But I agree, they're wonderful regions, and they're there for a reason. They're historically there. But climate change is going to, if you read some of the climate change scientists and the models that we look at, climate change will really affect continental Europe badly, really badly. Whereas southern Australia, because we've got the Southern Ocean, which is the coldest body of seawater in the world, that is our big fridge, and that's what's keeping Margaret River, Coonawarra, Mornington, Tasmania especially, free of that. So it could change in Europe. You think about Bordeaux, if you drink Bordeaux as well as Burgundy, those wines are now often 14.5%, 15.5%. Burgundy's creeping up. Alcohols are creeping up as the vines get more, because they're chewing more CO2, they're metabolising faster. You've got to wait for the flavour to catch up with the sugar. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, if we're here in, none of us will be here in 100 years, but you never know. It'll be interesting to see what the styles are like and whether that changes and whether they can keep that stuff going. They'll reinvent, and they're beautiful wines.
One last question, Hendo.
Andrew, thank you very much for the wines. For me, the Grenache is the best. Wonderful wine. The word you're looking for in German just now is Schwanzkopf, in relation to Mr. Trump. Schwanzkopf.
Schwanzkopf.
Schwanzkopf. It means dick.
Something head.
I always found it useful to know swear words in German. I understand your nickname is Ox. Would you care to expand upon that, or should we hide that behind the screen of...
It's all right. We just had our 40-year school reunion from finishing school on Friday, actually. Actually, it was Friday, Saturday and some of Sunday. But, and in grade 5, I started at St Peter's, and one of my friends, Henry Reimel, we were playing basketball on the courts, and I was quite tall from age then. I crashed through a pack, and he said, "You bloody great Ox," and that's it. Stuck from there. And the only people that haven't called me Ox by choice since then really have been Mum and Dad. They gave me a perfectly good Christian name, and they stuck with it. So very simple. But you'll see the label around, this is an unashamed plug, you'll see the label around in a couple of months. Ox Hardy. So be sure to look out for that. One more?
Thank you very much. Don't go away. Thank you very much, Andrew. It's been, I think you can tell from the interest during the question session, it's been extremely well received, as were the wines. So thank you very much for that. But there's one other thing that I believe we've got to thank Andrew for, and I didn't mention it before, but in the early days, Andrew was one of the very first proponents and champions of Stilven caps. And I think we all have a lot to thank him for. So with that, Andrew, I'm not sure that this rotary pen quite matches the value of the Magnum, but it goes with our thank you.